Hi guys, I'm going to try something a little bit different. I'm recording on my computer and hopefully it works out. So this is episode 1 of Can My Quail Be Profitable? And I'm going to talk today about the go big or go home mentality. Okay. Just if you haven't watched the first video, go back, watch the first video. I'm always going to recommend you go to My Shire Farms YouTube page and watch their Quail for Profit playlist. Then come over here if you are smaller and you're looking at things like how to scale or how do you start if you're somewhere like a backyard, which is what I'm doing right now, a backyard on 1/10 of an acre. So go there first, make sure you do your research. Okay, so go big or go home. So you've decided you want to do a quail business. You've watched the Quail for Profit playlist on My Shire Farms YouTube, and you're like, I'm definitely doing this. Should you jump in head first and spend your entire retirement or all your savings and get into quail? Let's talk about this. Okay, so I have a lot of people come to me individually because I'm a moderator for the Quail for Profit Facebook group, and I help people out whenever they have questions. And so I have actually had someone come to me and they did not have a business at all. They were retired, but they had like a retirement savings, and they spent the better part of their retirement getting a quail shed, getting it heated, getting a big industrial cabinet incubator, getting brooders, like all the cages, then buying in tons of eggs to hatch. Well, if you've never hatched eggs and the first time you're doing it, you're trying on hundreds or thousands, that's a problem, because learning how to hatch eggs and finding that sweet spot, it's not rocket science, but there is some trial and error involved. There is some base knowledge that's good to help. If you want to do that, I highly suggest going to Quail University. You can literally just type in quailuniversity.com. It'll pop right up. It's like right now it's more than 8 hours of base knowledge. It's good to have a base knowledge. But then I want you to think about, why do you want to get into quail? Like, here's an example. So I live in my in-laws' basement with my husband and 2 kids. And during the pandemic, we decided we wanted to get chickens. And after we got chickens, I was like, well, it's going to be 6 months before we get eggs, at least. And then we're probably going to find out half of them are roosters, right? At least half. That's just how it goes. So I found out about quail and we got into quail. But before we got into quail, I did a ton of research. And then we met a local guy who toured us around his yard, showed us his smaller back. He had an industrial farm too, which he didn't let anybody on, but he showed us his backyard, a basic quail setup, and he taught us how to process the quail for meat. And we took home the meat and we took home the eggs, and we tried the meat and we tried the eggs. If you don't like quail meat or eggs, it's kind of rough to get started. I think you should, the easiest way is to like the meat and eggs, because we started with 50 chicks. Usually about half of those are hens. So if half are hens, you got 25 hens. You only need 5 roosters for 25 hens. What are you going to do with the other 20 roosters? You could try selling them, but if you don't have a market and you're super new, it's a lot easier to just put them in the freezer and eat. I promote quail for self-sufficiency purposes, especially in small settings and in cities and HOAs and places that have lots of rules. So it is wise to have an outlet for the meat and the eggs right away. If you're not going to get the meat, if you're not going to eat the meat, then you need to find someone that has adults and start with just hens or a breeding set or something like that. However, I highly recommend having like being able to process them for meat or having someone that can help you do that and then saving it in the freezer. That's ultimately the best purpose for them. Because we started out with 50, we processed all the extra roosters, and then we started getting eggs. We were not a business when we started. We were not selling the eggs at all. We scaled, but we started without the intent to be a business. It was COVID. Who are you going to sell to? You can't see anybody. You're pretty much locked in your house. So we were eating the eggs and we were eating the meat and we were incorporating that into our diet. And we were saving a little bit of money on the grocery bill, a little bit, because it balances out with feed and stuff. But my point is, we were getting meat and eggs. Then we had extra eggs. And so we went to a local market. We were asked to go to a market and sell our quail eggs because they didn't have a quail egg person. So we went to the farmer's market, was selling quail eggs. Upon that, we started getting regular customers and they were like, hey, would you sell chicks? And so we're like, oh, yeah, we could do that. So we got an incubator. And we had slightly before that started hatching for our own purposes every couple months to replace our egg layers and to add more egg layers. So then we would just throw extra eggs in and hatch for customers. And then it just got busier and busier. We would have people that instead of wanting 10 chicks, they would want 50 or 100. And so last year, like 2022, 2023, we had a waiting list for months because people started finding out about quail and wanting quail with chickens or quail instead of chickens. But the only reason we were able to have that is because we scaled, for one, and for two, we spent a lot of time at the farmer's market talking to people about what it's like to raise quail, what the eggs taste like, selling them eggs, giving them samples, educating them on the difference between raising quail and raising chickens, educating them on the laws between raising quail and raising chickens. And we didn't ever try to sell the birds. We were just like, here's some eggs if you want them. If you don't want them, we're going to take them home and eat them. And then people were like, well, I want chicks. So they would get chicks and they would come over and we would teach them things and show them how we set it up in our yard and talk to them based on what the rules are in their city. So we slowly kind of built on that. And if you teach one person something and they love it, they're going to teach like 3 other people. And then more people learn. And I spend time on social media making a lot of graphics or TikTok videos, things like that. And especially in like December, January, when it's about to be spring in a few months and people are thinking about what chickens they're going to order usually, or mourning the loss of not being able to have more chickens, I'm educating people on quail and the benefits of quail. So I'm constantly creating that business. But that's how we got started, and we scaled it slowly. Right now, we have what some people in the city would consider a lot, usually a couple hundred birds. Some people, that's nothing. But to someone with not a lot of property and in a very small shed area, that's a lot. But you have to kind of scale and gauge your situation. If you don't have a market, don't jump in and spend your entire retirement getting a shed and a brooder and an incubator. You're going to kill a lot of eggs if you don't know what you're doing. If you're not going to eat the meat, what are you going to do with all them extra birds? You're not just going to let them go, because Coturnix, FYI, if you didn't know this, you can't let them go. They're not smart. They don't have any instincts left. They're just for livestock purposes for meat and eggs. So they either make a really cute, great, chunky pet, like a little potato bird, or they're great for eating and laying eggs. So don't go crazy. I still, even this week, I've had people reach out to me and they see what I'm doing and they think, well, I'm just going to get an incubator. I've done chickens before. and start throwing eggs in and start hatching them. You don't, just because I have a market does not mean you have a market. There could be 20 people in your area selling quail eggs. And if you don't, like, you have to do something to make yourself stand out amongst the crowd. So I don't think you should go big or go home at all. I think you need to do your research. I think you need to hone in on your market, and you need to find what makes you different and sets you apart from other people. If you're out in BFE and you have 500 quail and you're not eating them, what are you going to do with them? I have other outlets. So I can't have a lot of roosters in the city because they make a lot of noise. And if there's enough complaints, the city's going to come out and we're going to have a problem. So, and it doesn't matter the legality, because if the neighbors complain enough, you're not going to be able to have anything legally, not even dogs. So I also, at 3 or 4 weeks, because I'm in the city, I can't keep all the extra roosters. I have one falconer customer and I sell him at a very discounted rate, smaller 3 or 4 week old birds. So if I haven't sold them as chicks, and then at 3 or 4 weeks, I find out they're roos, I keep the big ones. The rest of them go to the falconer. If in a little bit, like, I don't sell them as adults, as hens or roos, I either use them to replace breeders or I eat them. And so I recycle through a lot of breeders. But I always have a use for what I'm hatching. If I don't have a use for it, I don't need to be running the incubator. Now, I know if you're watching this and you have an incubator, sometimes you find out that eggs just fell in there and you're like, man, I don't even know how that happened. I have been there. I have seen my husband eyeballing me like, how'd those eggs get in there? And I'm like, man, I don't even know. I'm like, I'll try to tell you, it's like a magnet. But that's more food for me. I am never, ever contingent on somebody buying chicks. I have probably 160 chicks in my living room right now. And if not a single one gets bought, that's more food in my freezer. That's more breeders to replace my older breeders. And either way, whether I'm using them to replace breeders or I'm eating them when they get big enough, it's food for me. It's more eggs if I have enough cages to keep the layers. I'm not worried about that. And so that helps you be able to scale and see. If you don't have a market, and if you're coming to me and you're saying something like, this is something I have heard more than once, but recently, I can't even give these things away, then you probably shouldn't be hatching them. If you can't use them yourself and sell the extra or use all of what you're hatching, then you need to scale back or figure out another outlet. There's reptile owners, there's falconers, people eat the meat, you can eat the meat. There's lots of different outlets for it, but you need to make sure you have that base knowledge of where you can get rid of extras if you need to, but always be willing, especially if you want to get in doing a business, to eat them yourself. If you have a problem killing an animal and you don't have someone like a spouse that's willing to do it for you and help you, then I honestly, it's going to be kind of hard, because then you're like, oh, I got to sell these chicks, or, oh, I got to sell these eggs, or what do I do with all these extras? It's just hard. So I think scaling, please don't go big or go home. I've listened to the Quail for Profit playlist a lot, but I listened to this podcast called Carrot Cash Flow, and it's really awesome. It interviews a lot of smaller farms. And the guy said this morning, if things go horribly wrong, I'm looking at my phone so I don't forget the quote. If things go horribly wrong, how can you get out of it? If you just spent your entire retirement and you have no market for the birds that you have, for the eggs that you have, where are you going to sell the extra stuff? Where are you going to sell the incubator? Where are you going to sell off the extra birds? What are you going to do with that shed? What are you going to do with all those cages and the brooder that you just bought and all that money you put into it? What are you going to do? with that. You might be able to sell it if you can sell it at all. If there's no market around, I don't know. Because the bigger stuff is kind of hard to ship. You're not shipping an incubator very far if it's a big cabinet one. You might be able to sell it at retail price, usually not though. And so you're usually taking a hit when you go to resell it, which makes it, you just spend all that time and all that money and you might get your money back, but you're not getting the time back and the time that it took to do that. So if things go horribly wrong, how are you going to get out of it? If you don't like the answer to that question, you either went way too big, way too fast, or it might not be the right business for you. So I think you should do your research first. I do know somebody that I would say is more along the lines of go big or go home than slowly scaling, but they did a lot of research before they got started. They had raised Coturnix before, they'd raised other types of game birds before, and they wanted to get back into it. But they made connections with local, like farmers and hunters. They have a connection with a restaurant and outlets to sell the meat and sell the eggs. And they have all their infrastructure, and they're just now getting to the point that they're going to hatch some birds and get started. So they've done all that ahead of time, and they already have their market. So they know exactly how many they need to hatch to keep up with their market, and they're very, very organized. So if you're going to go big or go home right at the beginning, I hope you did a lot of research. And if you're already at that point, just be prepared that you're going to have lots of extra food. Who wants a cheaper grocery bill? I do. It's okay to eat them, and it's okay to eat a hen. You can hatch another one. A lot of people have a problem with eating hens, but when you get to the point that you're running out of cages, you can just replace them with younger hens. You can replace the males with younger males and eat them. Quail is delicious meat, and if you haven't tried it, you need to. So last thing I want to say about this, if you have raised chickens, I will probably say this in every video, and I know it's in some of my other videos. If you've raised chickens, don't assume they're the same thing. They are not the same thing. Quail, the first 2 weeks are on suicide watch, basically. You need a different waterer or a ton of rocks. You need to make sure that you don't have bedding they're going to eat. You need to make sure they're not chomping on their poop, because they will. You need to make sure they can't get up in their feed containers and suffocate, because they will. You have to make sure the temperature's right. I don't recommend heat lamps. Chickens do fine on heat lamps. Chickens do fine with bigger water things because they're not trying to drown. It's a lot different. Even from raising Coturnix quail and button quail, totally different. So just because they have feathers and they're small, don't assume it's the same thing. It is a lot different. And when you get out in the market, even if you have a market for chicken eggs and you try to sell some quail eggs, be prepared that a ton of people are going to be like, what is that? And think it's weird and not try it. Some people love it, especially if they're not born and raised in America. A lot of other countries, it's a delicacy. Everybody's had them. They're great. It's still becoming a thing in the United States. So you need to be prepared to educate people. You need to be prepared to make mistakes, and that's okay, because failure is just new information. But just know they're not the same thing as chickens, and you're going to need to change up your routine a little bit. And that's okay. But just don't do the same thing you would do for chickens. I give all my customers a new care sheet. I recommend if you're selling chicks to do the same and make sure you're giving them some base knowledge before they take off and kill the chicks within 3 seconds, because that does happen. But yeah, hopefully this helps. Like I said, watch My Shire Farms Quail for Profit playlist and just kind of think before you blow all your money. You can get started for very little money and scale and learn from others around you and those that have come before and those that are doing it now. I hope this helps people out there. I'm definitely going to start sending people here And hopefully that means I won't have to be on the phone as much kind of troubleshooting, but I'm always here. If you're local, you know my number. It's on my website, and I am more than happy to help. So hope this helps you guys. Go big or go home. Not so much. Okay, guys, have a great day. Bye.